Welcome back to the WishKeeper serial podcast, and thank you for coming back. I guess that means I did something right in the first episode. Let's keep going with Shea's story. It's barely just begun. We last saw Shea dealing with not only remembering a difficult past, but managing her boring and monotonous day-to-day life. The argument with her dad at the end of Chapter 2 is just a very brief glimpse into their relationship, and really just the tip of the proverbial iceberg where they're concerned. Their relationship is a bit of a powder keg because neither of them have dealt with the loss of Shea's mom very well. Shea just wants to forget, and Beren needs to hold on. And even though we all deal with loss differently, Shea and Beren have allowed their processes to push each other away, even though they're father and daughter. So stay tuned. After this episode is over, we're moving on to Chapter 3 here. And yes, this episode will contain only one chapter, but that's because Chapter 3 is kind of an epic one, and it was a very interesting one for me to write. I'll give more insight into my process of writing this chapter after this episode is over. It's rarely easy getting exposition across in a quick and succinct way, and since I've built a rather huge universe in this book, there's a lot to cover. Little by little, I reveal bits about the world, so listen in, pay attention, and hopefully you become as enamored with my little wishing world as I have. So let's dive in and get back to Shea and see what kind of trouble she's about to get into. Enjoy, and thanks again.
The WishKeeper, Book 1 of the Paragonia Chronicles, written by Maximilian Timm, read and performed by Molly Cash and Maximilian Timm. Episode 2, Chapter 3. Chapter 3, The Other Side of Bittersweet. Every day, Shea would traverse the valley countryside on her walking commute to work. It was a long trek, but it was the only part of the day she enjoyed. No one asked her questions about her wings, and she didn't have to answer to anything other than her own thoughts, and she, of course, always agreed with herself. She would purposely take the same path every morning, enjoying the comfort of knowing what to expect from around each corner and over every little hill. She stuck close to the edge of the forest, where the valley cradled the trees, and fingers of River Paragonia rippled clear water over smooth, round rocks. She rarely looked up at the sky anymore, embracing what the ground had to offer and taking solace in how little it changed. It was nice to see things that didn't judge her or force her to change or remember a birthday she hated to remember. The Bittersweet Bridge would mark the end of her commute, and its small wooden nameplate reminded her of the history lessons she had learned as a small fairy. She liked the word bittersweet, but hated how it represented a moment in Paragonian history that she believed to be treacherous and deceitful, though she was the only fairy to have such an opinion. The Other Side of Bittersweet, the event, or really the sugar-coated lie, was titled as such. Her ancestors destroyed 100 wishes in order to live in their beloved secret world. For thousands of years, her ancestors lived alongside the humans, or wishmakers as they called them. But when the makers started to spread out and unknowingly infiltrate the woods and lands of the earth, a new home had to be created. A home completely separate, completely secret. Shea never understood why they couldn't simply find a way to live with the wishmakers. Her father incessantly reminded her that the makers have a hard time accepting something so different, so strange. When Shea would look at her broken wings in the mirror, she wondered if her own kind was more accepting. There was also the problem of a wishmaker discovering a keeper's role in granting wishes. Should a maker discover such a thing, evidently all wish-granting would cease. This is at least what her elders told her. At this point, Shea didn't care. Her own kind destroyed wishes in order to create something for themselves, using wishes for selfish intentions. It was dark magic, even though the history books refused to admit it. But when she would look around on her long walks to the nursery and remember how much she loved her home, she understood the meaning of bittersweet. It was bittersweet in that she loved Paragonia, all the while knowing it was created by questionable means. To make it worse, Paragonia was slowly disappearing, literally. Since Shea's parents had destroyed the true love wish 10 years ago and removed their wishing king, little by little the forests and trees had vanished, leaving nothing more than a gleaming white edge to their land. It was just another reason to harbor the ever-increasing resentment towards her deceased mother. What was impossible to forget was the price the Wishkeepers paid for their new home. A human needed to be their wishing king. A wishing king was a human whom, every 100 years, the Wishkeepers selected to sit upon the Paragonian throne. The problem was not that a human owned such a realm, but that such a rule was necessary in the completion of the dark magic used in destroying the wishes and creating their new land. Dark magic comes with a price, and the price was always to keep a physical connection between the human world and their own, and thus a human needed to be crowned king. When their last wishing king was removed, the Wishkeeper's world slowly began its descent into nothingness. Even just his name flashed anger and hatred through Shea's little body. The keepers selected a man named Erebus to be their wishing king because of the supposedly powerful wishes he had made in his lifetime. It didn't take him long to get greedy and want the wishes for himself. And when a true love wish was made, oh, how he wanted it. Shea would never forget his face, and she would never forget that he was the real reason she's handicapped. Erebus was cast away to the Maker's world after her parents destroyed the last true love wish, and she'd heard the rumors of how he had taken over the other side. She shuddered at the thought of what this world must look like, consumed by his fog, dark, hopeless. Quickly, she would remember her broken wings made it virtually impossible for her to venture to the other side, despite her desperately wanting to. By the time this thought had clamped around her brain, she would find the other end of the bittersweet bridge and the front gate of the Wish Nursery directly in front of her. She never tired of the same thoughts, the same musings that ricocheted through her mind during her commute. As desperate and gloomy as they were, she grew used to them, as if they were supportive, best friends. She didn't have any real friends, so she was thankful for how easy the thoughts returned every day. By the time she made it to the nursery, she needed to say goodbye to her friends and begin the monotony and annoyance of sweeping and cleaning the wish pens and adding sprinkle feeds to the meal spouts. The Wish Nursery was a massive compound of thatched roof barns, wooden stables, and small ponds that rimmed the base of the far eastern edge of the Paragonian Mountains. It housed every wish brought from the other side. A decade ago, the nursery was overflowing with wishes. Now it was nearly empty and sad and lonely. The only thing Shea enjoyed about working in the nursery was that it was easy to get lost and hide from the surrounding world. Most days, anyway. On this day, the nursery would be bombarded by a slew of keeper recruits trying to impress their commanding officers by acting as though they knew what to do inside the nursery. None of them really knew what to do with the wishes they'd wrangled, and Shea tried to stay out of sight any time recruits came around. It wasn't just because of how dumb their questions were, but more the wide-eyed second looks that were filled with disgust as they noticed Shea's charred wings. The inevitable bullying and name-calling was one thing. Words were easy to ignore. The spoken word didn't push against the chest as much as the silent one. Freak, loser, disgusting imp. Names were just names, and Shea had gotten used to them. Dumb questions could be dodged, too. Can you feel them at all? How do you get around if you can't fly? She would always smirk a little when that last one was asked. I have my ways. The smirks, though, only brought more abuse and sideways glances. A hardened exterior may deflect an onslaught, but even the toughest armor could be chipped away over time, and the never-ending, wordless stares were the most difficult to avert. She felt bad for the hopeful recruits, for the relentless hope and optimism. They were idiots for believing a wish could be granted. Every day she was reminded of how dismal their fulfillment situation was. Not one wish had been granted in almost a year, and she saw firsthand what happened to wishes when they went unfulfilled. As she placed her wand into the time and attendance slot outside the main gate, Leroy, the ancient guard that had been stationed at the stable gate for the past century or so, would always greet her the same way. A wink without looking at her, a click of his teeth, the tip of a non-existent cap, and a line of, "Even star to the rescue." Shea hated that fairy. Shea finally felt like she was awake enough to function outside of her thoughts, and when she spoke to Leroy for the first time in 10 years, she thought he was going to faint. "I'm not here to rescue anything, and can you please just call me Shea?" she yelled, not giving Leroy a chance to start his greeting. The anger from her recent argument with her father and the sudden remembering of her mother's birthday was still thick in her throat. She immediately felt a little guilty for snapping at him, but when he stared at her, Shea quickly realized that there was a very good chance he had never before noticed that her wings were broken. His look darted back and forth between her eyes and wings, and he was suddenly completely incapable of even a stuttered word. Shea felt a rush of disappointment. This might have been the only fairy in all of Paragonia who didn't know her wings were the way they were simply because he had never actually looked at her. She felt like cursing out loud, but simply left the stunned fairy at the gate and went inside.
Evenstar, you're back. Good to have you.
A curly-haired, dopey-looking nursery hand called out. He had a bright blue puppy dog-like wish tugging on a spell that connected to the end of his wand. The wish's tongue was wagging with excited breaths. Its bulging eyes were tightly shut as it concentrated on the game of tug-of-war. An athletic wish was one of the more annoying wishes to manage, though Shea always had a silent love for athletes. She liked how much they enjoyed showing off, but more so how difficult a time the hands had while trying to keep them in their pens. Shea never had a problem with them. "I'm not back, Rufus, and stop pulling so hard on him. He just wants to play," Shea replied as she walked through the main gate. Rufus relaxed his grip a bit and the athlete stopped tugging.
"Sure looks like you're back,"
Rufus said. "I'm not."
Shea Evenstar, Miss Shea."
Tully always greeted everyone 3 times before starting his obsessively compulsive conversations. Shea called him 3 times Tully as a friendly joke, but since he never understood why she called him that, the joke just simply became a name. I know my orders today 3 times. No need for roll call, thanks. Tully was the nursery supervisor, and Shea never blamed him for being constantly nervous. Security posts were to be manned and operated throughout the nursery, and roll call was necessary to ensure that each nursery hand understood his or her responsibilities every day. Shea felt that roll call was virtually pointless, seeing as though so few wishes were in need of tending in the first place. Still, it wasn't easy managing the wishes, much less the keepers that came and went on a daily basis, so Shea was at least relatively willing to be patient with Tully. On a day when moronic recruits were going to be shuffling in and out, Tully's anxiety was expected to be at an all-time high.
Yes, you know your post orders. I appreciate that, Miss Shea, but your post orders have...
Damn, they're early. Shea spotted a group of roughly 10 young fairies flying toward the nursery. They each had bright, excited wishes attached to wrangling spells, as if they'd caught a balloon with a rope. It was always clear which recruit had wrangled a money wish. They were rarely able to stay in rank. A few recruits were tossed, pulled, and whipped in every direction as they tried handling their monies. Impossibly rude and having no regard for their wishing process, money wishes had a green glow and a pointed cone shape. Ugly as trolls, Shea thought. Even though the wishes didn't speak, they squeaked more than anything. The monies had a way with their squeaking that was incessantly annoying.
But, Miss Shea, your post orders...
Tully tried to continue. Only 10 this year. The keeper force is really kicking butt, eh, Tully? Rufus, Shea called out. You've got some athletes coming your way. A couple ladders, too. I'll handle the purities.
You always handle the purities.
Rufus grumbled and tied up the athlete he'd been struggling with. Relax, I'll take the monies, too. Shea removed a wand from her side, released a deep, annoyed breath, and called out, Purities and monies over here, ladders and athletes to your left. The recruits split up and flew toward various areas of the nursery. 2 groups careened toward Shea, but only Tully was nervous. Shea rolled her eyes as she watched them fly in. 2 fairies had purities wrapped in wrangling spells. They landed perfectly in front of Shea, barely out of breath. Went for the easy ones, eh? Shea said to the 2 female recruits. They looked at each other, blushing, knowing that they did, in fact, take the easy route. Don't worry, I would have done the same thing, Shea said, still keeping her eyes on the incoming recruits struggling to bring their monies. Purities are pink, peaceful, consistently happy little wishes that always float directly toward their keeper. They rarely put up a fuss and would rather help a wishkeeper than hinder any part of the wishing process. They represent a maker's wish for health, spiritual and family prosperity, and so on. Rather boring, Shea thought, but they are quite easy to manage. Shea lazily waved her wand from left to right, sending yellow sparks in an arc above her. The monies dashed to the sparks, forcefully pulling their recruits. Not one recruit landed on his feet. It was just another attempt to try and show off. Recruits assumed that wrangling a money wish would give them high marks, but the wild and obnoxious wishes usually ended up embarrassing them. One recruit crashed to the ground and rolled to Shea's feet. He still had the wish wrangled with a spell, which was somewhat impressive, but Shea didn't bother addressing him as he quickly stood up and gathered himself. Purities inside, through the main hall, to the right, and into the purity garden. The 2 female recruits walked their happy little purities into the main hall of the nursery, while the rest of the recruits had their arms yanked and tugged while awaiting orders. Okay, the rest of you. The sound of a whip pulled her attention to a tall, muscular young recruit about twice her size. He did it again. The recruit whipped his spell like a rope and cracked a wrangling spell over and over around the small money. The wish winced as he did it again. His nose was sharply pointed and his bright green hair was spiked to a tip at the top of his head. He looked like the typical wishkeeper that was trying too hard, but despite the obvious efforts to look the part, Shea could tell this recruit was probably one of the few that would actually complete the training and move on. He was cocky, strong, and tall, all of the things that just made Shea hate him even more. She wanted to crack a whip at him, slash a bloody cut under his eye, and ask him how it felt. The blood drained from her knuckles as she tightened her grip around her wand. It sparked just enough for the recruit to notice. Even though the monotonous nursery work annoyed every little bit of Shea, she did still love the wishes. Mishandling them was unacceptable. Seeing a wishkeeper treating them with disrespect, punishable.
What's up with your wand? Malfunctioning?
The recruit said, shaking his head, purposely taunting.
You should get that checked out.
He knew she didn't have any authority over him and loved every bit of it. Follow me, please, she said through a clenched jaw, trying to ignore the self-righteous recruit. Shea's reaction the last time a recruit mishandled his wish had led to her dismissal to well-washing duty for a week. On top of not wanting to scrape bird crap off of unused wishing wells, she just wanted her nursery duties to be over. The sooner, the better. She waved them down a wide, weed-covered path. It wound around the edge of a main hall toward a large pasture lined with ivy-covered fences, the money pens. She took a couple steps, but paused and heaved a frustrated sigh as she noticed a skinny little recruit trying to keep up. "You," she addressed him, annoyed. "What kind of wish is that?" He blushed and looked up at his wish. A bright purple wish was circling his head like a hawk.
Money?
"What colored are monies?" she asked, even more annoyed. His brain was working overtime.
Green.
He quickly noticed his was purple.
Oh.
Again, "What kind of wish is that?" she asked, rolling her eyes. His face was blank. "Let our wishes represent?" she asked, impatient, waiting for a reply. Nothing. "Since when am I your wish instructor? Come on, make or career advancement, home improvement, education. What's wrong with you idiots?" More blank stares, though the muscular, pointed hair recruit was laughing. She sighed again and continued down the dirt path.
I should have wrangled a death wish. The crippled nursery hand wouldn't be so disrespectful.
The muscular recruit mumbled with a smirk as he jabbed the fairy next to him. Cripple. It made her bony wings tingle every time she heard the word. When she was younger, it would make her run away to a secluded corner of the world and cry the anger away, but she had since learned to harness her anger. Her blood boiled as she quickly bounded toward him, wand sparking, till he yelped and jumped in front of her. "You may just get your wish, punk," Shea yelled, her forehead barely reaching the middle of his chest as she stared up at him.
Miss Shea,
Tully cried.
you're scaring the recruits, miss, and please, your post orders.
Scaring? Yeah.
The cocky recruit didn't budge, laughing over Shea's outburst. "I know my post orders, Tully. Just let me do my job."
Your post orders have changed.
A voice called out from behind Shea. Beren was behind her, and nothing about his glare was happy.
General Beren, sir. General, sir.
Tully said, nervous. Shea rolled her eyes and sent a lazy salute to her dad.
We need all of the gatekeepers reporting to their respective gates, Shea. There's one recruit left to cross over, but we've lost sight of him. You're done here.
"Thank you," Shea said, already stomping toward the nursery exit.
Hey.
Her dad called out. He approached her with a low, serious voice.
These recruits risked their lives for a training session. You have no idea how difficult it is to wrangle a wish.
"Yeah, they have it so tough. I really feel bad for them." Her snarky remark was not what her ill-tempered father wanted to hear.
Drop the attitude. It's this kind of attitude.
"Those wishes aren't even real. They're training wishes," Shea yelled back. Beren paused, fuming. He released a tension-filled deep breath.
If I ever hear you talk back to a recruit like that again, you're done and will never leave the house. You understand me?
"Whatever," Shea said as she spun and continued her brisk, frustrated walk out of the nursery. No keeper ever used her gate, and she was more than happy to leave and spend the rest of her day relaxing. She secretly hoped that the recruit lost on the other side wouldn't come back. It would be one less WishKeeper wannabe to worry about.
Okay, so there we have Chapter 3, The Other Side of Bittersweet. The elements of exposition in a screenplay, anyway, for you writers out there, need to be drilled down as much as possible and told through action as much as possible. Dialogue can help with exposition, of course, but in a movie you have a limited time to get the plot across. In a book, you can dig in a little bit more and expand on the world you're building a little, but at the same time, I'm writing for a younger crowd, and we know how short attention spans can be, even in adults. This chapter was a tough one for me to write, admittedly, because I'd created this huge world with a very diverse and detailed history, but I didn't want to go too heavy into it all, so it was essential that I stressed the primary points and important facts so that A, they were understandable, and B, easy to remember, but also, again, through Shea's point of view. The first few drafts of Chapter 3 were terribly long, fun, and I loved writing it, but still way too long, and believe me, I left a lot out. So I drilled it down and did everything I could to get to the action as quickly as I could. Shea's character, as I'm sure you noticed, her character really shines in this chapter, at least begins to, and especially as far as her personality and how she reacts to the world around her. If you were counting, in a screenplay this would still be considered sequence 1, or roughly within the first 10 pages of the script, first 10 minutes of a movie, where we're seeing the main character entrenched in her world, in her misbehaviors, in her character flaws. They're all on display. That pretty much summarizes the first 5 to 10 minutes of a movie. So in The Other Side of Bittersweet, we're seeing Shea reacting to her dying little world, but musing over everything she's learned and within her own point of view. That's what was so essential for me. It wasn't easy expressing the various names and terms in this chapter, but it was important to put it here because the elements such as the bittersweet spell and the background on Paragonia's line of wishing kings are essential to the overall world that Shea lives in. My conceptual intent, if you will, with this book on a whole was to introduce a new mythology of what fairies are, why they're here, and how they're connected to us. I had to try and instill some sense of realism or relatability, but without overdoing it. In other words, my idea of the fairies needing to leave our world and create their own is simply a reference to the history of our own world and how we as a human race have spread out across the globe like a wildfire over the past millennia or so. The fairies needed to stay secret, but with the humans growing in population, they were kind of pushed out, and they didn't have any other choice than to create a whole new world for themselves. That world is called Paragonia, and it lives as a form of a neighboring and magical dimension that can be accessed only by the fairies. Well, for now, anyway. You'll notice that the overall series of this trilogy is called the Paragonia Chronicles, so the world that the fairies created plays a very big role, and overall, this is a story of its rise and fall, but I'll try not to give too much away. These elements are therefore important where books 2 and 3 are concerned even, but the history of Paragonia and how it was created becomes much more apparent and important as we move through book 1, so hang in there. We're moving toward chapter 4, which is titled The Recruit, and chapter 5, which is titled The Wingless Wonder in the upcoming episode. And this upcoming episode is where the secondary character, one of the primary heroes, beyond Beren, is introduced. His name is Thane, and for those of you who know me personally, you might see a few attributes within that character that are a tad familiar. So, again, thanks for listening and following along. Our reader, Molly Cash, did a great job with this episode, and I'm looking forward to you all finding out what happens in episode 3. As a reminder, and if you're old-fashioned like me and enjoy having a physical copy of a book in your hands, the pre-sales for the book start very soon, so you can stay tuned on Facebook and my various social media accounts to stay up to date. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and until next week, happy wishing.